article is entitled The Seventh Day Sabbath, read by Steve on June 9th, 2018. What is the Sabbath? When reviewing information about a biblical topic, especially topics as far-reaching as this one, a good place to start is to determine what the definitions of the Hebrew words actually mean. Below are definitions of the word transliterated as Sabbath from Strong's Dictionary. It's Strong's number H7676, Shabbat. It's the intensive from H7673, which means intermission, that is specifically the Sabbath. And also H7673, Shabbath, a primitive root to repose, that is desist from exertion, used in many implied relations, to cause to, let, make to cease, to celebrate, to cause or make to fail, to keep Sabbath, to suffer to be lacking, leave, put away, put down, make to rest, rid, still, or take away. From these definitions, we can see that the Sabbath is primarily an intermission of repose, in which we are to rest and desist from exertion. Beyond this function of rest, however, we will see in the study that the Sabbath also serves many other spiritual functions and designations. A universal pattern is established. While most people think that the weekly Sabbath was instituted on Mount Sinai when Moses received the Ten Commandments, Scripture actually reveals that a day of rest and worship has been established since creation. Genesis 2, 1-3. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. We can learn several things about the seventh day from this short passage. First of all, the word Sabbath is not used here, but it is designated simply as the seventh day. We don't find the actual word Sabbath occurring until later in Exodus 16, between the Hebrew slaves leaving Egypt and arriving at Mount Sinai. More on this in a bit. We also learn that this unique day is the seventh day of any given week and not just any day of our choosing. It is a universal pattern that is to be established for all of mankind and not just for the Israelites or the Hebrew people. We learn further that God rested from his work, setting this pattern for us to follow. We also learn that God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it. Understanding that it is the seventh day of the week and resting on this day are both easy enough to understand. But what about this concept of blessing and sanctification? The Hebrew term underlying the word blessed means to kneel, and by implication to bless God as an act of adoration, and vice versa, man as a benefit. This day is a day for us to honor and adore God, and, in a reciprocal fashion, man is to derive a benefit from God by resting and worshiping him. Similarly, the Hebrew term underlying the word sanctified in this verse is the root word that we get our English word holy from. It means to pronounce or observe as ceremonially clean, to consecrate, dedicate, or sanctify, or set apart for specific use. The blessing that God has pronounced on this seventh day, then, is to make this day unique from all of the other days of the week, as a day that is set apart uniquely to adore him and for us to receive a benefit from worshiping him and resting from our work. It can be quickly seen that the significance God has placed on this day is not to be taken lightly or as a matter of mere personal preference. God's gift of holy rest. The next time in the biblical narrative that we specifically see a specific reference to the seventh day is during the early days of the Exodus, after the people have left Egypt but have not yet reached Sinai in Exodus 16. It's here in the context of regulations regarding the gathering of the manna in the wilderness that this day is specifically referred to by Moses as the Sabbath or intermission. Exodus 16, 23-30. And he said unto them, This is that which the Lord hath said. Tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto the Lord. Bake that which you will bake today, and seethe that you will seethe, and that which remaineth over lay up for you to be kept until the morning. And they laid it up till the morning as Moses bade, and it did not stink, neither were there any worms therein. And Moses said, Eat that today, for today is a Sabbath unto the Lord. Today you shall not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the seventh day, which is the Sabbath, in it there shall be none. And it came to pass that there went out some of the people on the seventh day for to gather, and they found none. And the Lord said unto Moses, How long refuse ye to keep my commandments and my laws? See, for that the Lord hath given you the Sabbath. Therefore he giveth you on the 6th day the bread of 2 days. Abide ye every man in his place, and let no man go out of his place on the 7th day. So the people rested on the 7th day. While many more details can be drawn from this passage, 3 primary lessons are evident. Moses is giving them instructions about Sabbath at a time prior to Mount Sinai and the 10 Commandments. It is also designated a rest unto the Lord in verse 23, and not just a rest for doing nothing. The Sabbath is specifically the 7th day in verse 26. And Moses says the Sabbath is something given to them by God in verse 29. This idea of the Sabbath being a gift from God is echoed by Yeshua many years later when some of the Pharisees were arguing with him about the nature of this special day. In Mark 2:27 and 28, and he said unto them, The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath. Certainly, as a believer in Yeshua as the Anointed One or Messiah, I believe Yeshua was uniquely qualified to clarify the original intent of the Sabbath day. Notice the universal application of this day, as Yeshua does not say that the Sabbath was made for Jews, or Israelites, or Hebrews for that matter, but for man. He harkens back to the Genesis blessing that all men could receive by keeping the day as set apart to God, resting from their regular work and not complicating it with the traditions and rules of men. At Sinai, the Sabbath is further refined for us in the context of the 10 Commandments that Moses received from God. Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor, and do all thy work. But the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord hath made the heaven and the earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the 7th day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and hallowed it. 3 immediate points come to our attention. We see that this is not the first instance the Sabbath is conveyed to the Hebrews, as verse 11 says to remember the Sabbath as a command that had already been in place, as we saw in Exodus 16 above. Additionally, we learn of the universal application of this intermission command that extends to children, servants, strangers, which are non-Hebrews, and even the farming animals. God apparently intends this intermission for all, as mentioned earlier. We also see that one of the significant meanings God has intended is that the weekly Sabbath would serve as a memorial of the 6 days of creation for creation of all things in honor of the Creator. A sign and an enduring covenant. Exodus 31:12. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, Verily my Sabbaths ye shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that ye may know that I am the Lord that doth sanctify you. Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations, for a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the 7th day he rested and was refreshed. Interestingly, there is an English word used here, sign. The underlying Hebrew is H226, ot, which means a signal literally or figuratively, as a flag, beacon, monument, omen, prodigy, evidence, mark, miracle, sign, or token. Obviously, the Sabbath is meant as an identifying evidence of some kind that would serve several purposes. That you may know that I am the Lord that doth sanctify you. Strong's defines sanctify as to be, make, pronounce, or observe as clean, ceremonially or morally. This would serve as a designation of the uniqueness of his people from all others. For in six days the Lord made heaven and earth. This is another indication that the Sabbath is a memorial of creation, and hence the Creator. And on the 7th day he rested and was refreshed. This reaffirms the Sabbath as a memorial of God's 7th day rest, a pattern for us to follow as well. The Sabbath then, in addition to the benefit of rest, appears to be a representative mark or designation of those in whom God is working to set apart as his own. Through observance of the 7th day Sabbath, those who do so are demonstrating their recognition of, obedience to, and love for their Creator. Additionally, the Sabbath is described in enduring terms, throughout your generations, a perpetual covenant, forever. There is no scriptural evidence that I am aware of that at some point in the future the 7th day rest would be done away with or superseded by another day of the week. In fact, many, including myself, believe the seventh day is an eternal statute as implied by Isaiah. Isaiah 66:22 through 23. For as the new heavens and the new earth which I will make shall remain before me, saith the Lord, so shall your seed and your name remain. And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith the Lord. Sabbath observance was the custom of Yeshua. We see in the apostolic writings of the New Testament the evidence that our Master, being a Jew himself, faithfully observed and kept the Sabbath holy. Mark 1:21 and 22. And they went into Capernaum, and straightway on the Sabbath day he entered into the synagogue and taught. And they were astonished at his doctrine, for he taught as one that had authority and not as the scribes. And Luke 4:16. And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. Many other passages could be brought to bear on this truth. However, most readers tend to focus on the disagreements Yeshua had with the Jewish religious leaders over what was acceptable conduct on the Sabbath. Nevertheless, the apostolic writings are clear that Yeshua knew the Torah and could not be disobedient to it. While many could say that Yeshua had to obey it as a condition of the Old Covenant, certainly the fact that he did not abide by the traditional interpretation helps us see the true purpose of the day was not something to be legalistic about, but receptive to as a gift of God. Paul and the early believers honored the Sabbath. Acts 17:2. And Paul, as his manner was, went in unto them, and 3 Sabbath days reasoned with them out of the Scriptures. Acts 18:4. And he, Paul, reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and persuaded the Jews and the Greeks. Again, there are many references to Paul attending the synagogues throughout his ministry. This makes sense, as what we call the early church, even up to this point, a decade or so after the resurrection of Messiah, was made up almost exclusively of Jewish believers. In fact, the Messiah believers were so closely aligned with the scriptural practices of the Hebrew people that they were considered a sect of the Jews by others. Even many years later, Tertullus, attempting to bring charges against Paul, said, For we have found this man a pestilent fellow and a mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, in Acts 24:5. Later, when Paul was taken to Rome and discussing the Messiah with the local Jewish leaders, they said, But we desire to hear of thee what thou thinkest, for as concerning this sect, we know that everywhere it is spoken against, Acts 28:22. Therefore, being considered a sect within Judaism could only come about if Sabbath observance, along with Torah observance in general, was still in place with the believers. So in summary, here's a review of what we have learned about the seventh-day Sabbath. The seventh day is unique from all of the other days of the week established at creation, not just at Sinai. It is a day that is set apart uniquely to honor God as the Creator and serves as an enduring memorial of creation. Man also receives a unique benefit or blessing from worshiping God and resting from his or her work on this day. It is a gift from God to all of mankind, not just the Jews, as it was in place at creation many thousands of years before Mount Sinai. The Sabbath is a sign and identifying evidence of those who are desiring to be set apart to the Creator and obedient to Him out of love. Yeshua, our supreme example, honored the day as a day made for man's benefit and not in the manner of the religious traditionalists within Judaism. The early Messiah believers also continued the practice well beyond the day of Pentecost in Acts. The Sabbath is perpetual and enduring. There is no scriptural mandate that the uniqueness of this day was ever changed to the first day of the week, even in the context of the New Covenant. May Yahweh provide His gracious blessing upon you as you reflect on these passages and consider the truth of His Word.